No, it doesn't, it's not working. It's not working.
Not yet, Nathan.
Well, look at what? Look at me. I'm frozen. Technical difficulties.
Mhm.
Okay.
Wait,
Hmm?
are you okay?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yeah,
Yes, good. Okay.
We don't see the people here, the names. So, come on. Hopefully it'll pop up, but I can get rid of this now.
Technology is great when it works.
Yeah. Give it to Honey, she's good at this. Get rid of that. Sorry.
Now return to our regularly scheduled programming.
I have no idea what I did. It just worked. No? Yes?
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
good. You could admit somebody.
Should be good now.
Okay, we're back on the air. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all those brave souls who managed to come out this morning in the snow.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dzień dobry. Next week is Tanis Esther and Purim, and I want to talk a little bit about the status of Tanis Esther. We all know the story. When Esther is called upon to take action to potentially save the Jewish people, she asks Mordechai to have all the Jewish people in Shushan, and perhaps in the entire empire for that matter, fast for 3 days. And there was also a commemoration, there was prayer, what the Megillah calls Divrei Somos V'Tzak Kosam. And this is the basis for Tanis Esther. Let me read the psukim because the simple meaning perhaps requires some elucidation. Esther says to Mordechai, Leich Keno says, Kol HaYehudim Hanimtzim B'Shushan Abi. So get all the Jews in Shushan, V'tzumu Olai, fast for me on my mission to Achashverosh, V'al Talchlu, V'al Tishtu, don't eat, don't drink, Shlosha Yomim Laila V'yom, 3 full days, day and night. And Gamani, V'narosai Otsu came, and I and all of my maidservants will also fast. And then after 3 days of prayer and fasting, I will go unbidden to Achashverosh. And then later on, after the story is over, the Megillah records, like Hayem es Shmei Purim Elu, we observe Purim, Mizvaneim, etc., etc., because of what Mordechai and Esther did. They risked their lives, and because it mentions the last three words, Divrei Hatzomos V'Zakosa. They fasted and they prayed. So, based on the Megillah, one would think that we should all fast for 3 days. I mean, that would be the simple understanding. Interestingly, now let's try to unravel this whole story. The Midrash tells us that what made this fast even more interesting is that it took place on Pesach. And in fact, Maseches Sofrim, one of the minor tractates, talks about a notion. There is a concept of fasting for 3 days. We don't do that on Nisan because that's not an appropriate time to fast because of the Yontif. Because Pesach comes, it's a month full of joy and rejoicing, so we don't fast during Nisan.
Through treatment, it seems to be.
The Shulchan Aruch also records a minhag, and several Rishonim, the Rivash and others, also quote that apparently in some places there was a minhag to fast for 3 days. Because the Megillah says, Laila v'yom, 3 days. Okay? So, obviously we don't do that. So we have to figure out what we do and why we do it. Tanis Esther commemorates the fasting that was done on the 13th of Adar. And the 13th of Adar is called a Yom Kenisa, a day of gathering. They gathered in prayer. So it's called a Yom Kenisa. And they gathered in prayer before they went out to battle against Haman and his forces. And one of the Gaonim writes, or Achai Gaon writes, that they gathered to fast and they said slichos prior to going out to war. And that's the basis, he says. Not the fast of Esther. It's interesting. Not the fast of Esther, which was 3 days long during the month of Nisan, during Pesach, but the fact that before they went to war, on the 13th of Adar, they said slichos and they davened, and then they went to battle Haman and his forces. That's why we fast on Tanis Esther. If you ask the average person, they wouldn't give you that answer. But that apparently is the answer that most of the Rishonim bring. That it was because of the prayers that they did prior to the battle, and not so much because of Esther. Nevertheless, the Chayyim points out that we still call it Tanis Esther because it commemorates the idea that Hashem listens to our prayers. And apparently there were 2 fasts, or maybe even 3, that took place at this time. But we remember all of these fasts when we fast on Tanis Esther. So that's, yes.
Who wrote the Megillah? Who wrote it?
Guys outside.
The question was, who wrote the Megillah?
I'm coming down.
It was Mordechai.
Shai is outside shoveling.
Probably Esther. And Mordechai was a member of the Anshe Knesset Agdola, so I guess he was one that had distributed throughout the Jewish community. But the narrative itself, I would say Mordechai and Esther. Mostly Esther, perhaps given the fact that she was a woman, Mordechai was probably given the credit for the authorship, in all probability. So the question, so historically, the Esther was not so much her fast, but the fast of the entire community prior to going to battle with Haman. That's one historical feature. The next question we have to ask ourselves is, who ordained that this fast be observed? Where is the source for it? And does it have the same status as all other public fasts? Now, we know the Navi talks about 4 fast days. You find it in Navi. You have the Tzom Chamishi, Tzom Revi, so etc., etc. Shavasa B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Asara B'Teves. These are all mentioned in Navi. Esther is a post, I would say post-biblical because Megillah Esther is part of Tanakh, but it's not mentioned as one of the Jewish communal fast days that we should be observing in Tanakh anyway. So it's nor is it mentioned in the Gemara. Nor is it there are a lot of historical interesting questions about fast days. You know, one of the most intriguing questions is during the time of the Bayis Sheni, did they observe Shavasa B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av? Fascinating question. And there are many sources indicate that they did, because they were mourning the destruction of the first temple, even though they had the second temple. Today we mourn both.
Second temple was as great as the first one, so there's something to mourn about.
You could argue that it wasn't as, but nevertheless, you mourn destruction of our central location. Now we have a central location, but apparently they did observe it according to many sources. So where does the authority come? Gemara does not mention Tanis Esther as one of the fast days. And most of the Rishonim and Achronim agree that the fast is simply based on minhag. Tanis Esther is based on, Mr. Brura quotes that, Maggid Mishnah quotes that. It's a minhag. And it's a minhag obviously sanctioned by the rabbis. It's a minhag of, it goes back to,
How much do you want to
I
pay?
guess, the year after Purim
We'll see
took
when he
place.
gets through.
I assume that
What do you
Mordechai
think?
and the Anshe Knesset Agdola ordained that they should remember what happened last year,
When he gets through.
and they
Don't
ordained that
forget
this should be a
the,
fast day.
back porch a little bit.
Okay.
Please,
Nathan, silence your mic. So it should be a fast day going forward. And even though it's not mentioned anywhere in the Gemara, all the Rishonim agree that this is a minhag that is established. And again, since it might be connected to a pasuk, Divrei Hatzomos Ha'elu in Megillah Esther, so maybe according to the Bach, he says, well, it could be considered Divrei Kabbalah. It has a smach, a little bit of a connection. Okay, but most people hold that it's a minhag. Now, what are the practical applications of Tanis Esther being a minhag as opposed to Asar B'Teves and Shavasa B'Tammuz and so forth and so on? So let's talk about what happens if a fast day comes out on Shabbos. When Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday. Okay? Because we always delay bad events rather than advance them. Fine. If Tanis Esther comes out for some reason on Shabbos, we don't go back. We don't say you fast on Sunday because that would be Purim. So we go back. We advance the Tanis earlier rather than later because it is not, unlike the other fast days which commemorate tragedies, Purim is not a fast day of perennials. Ultimately, the result of Esther's work was joy and simcha, right? They defeated Haman and his forces. So most of the Rishonim hold that the halacha is that we advance the fast earlier rather than push it off to Sunday. And there are interesting tshuvos. Somebody is traveling on a Thursday when it was Tanis Esther. And she wanted to fast on Friday instead. Because it was hard to fast while she was traveling. And Rashi Paskin, that since the fast is only a minhag, you could allow it, except for the notion of al tifrosh min hatzibur, which is another factor to come into. So a lot of interesting questions that come about that. Because it's a minhag, we are much more lenient with Tanis Esther. There are more rules that someone who doesn't feel well, not sick, but just doesn't feel well, can make it up on a different day. You don't have to fast. If you don't feel well at Tanis Esther, you don't have to fast, but you have to make it up on a different day. And the Mishnah Berurah makes it very clear that we make a distinction between someone who is ill versus someone who just doesn't feel well. If I have sniffles or a little headache, I'm not really in the category of a chola. A chola is exempt if you're really sick. You have to go lie down in bed. But if you have a little cough or a little headache, that does not make you into a chola. Nevertheless, for other Tanesim, you wouldn't be exempt. But for Tanis Esther, you can make it up on a different day because the fast is only a minhag. That's number one. Another fascinating thing, again, I've mentioned this before, that one of the areas that is a treasure house of ideas that people unfortunately don't study and are not familiar with are our slichos. The slichos that we say on all the fast days are phenomenal sources of information. If you look at our slichos for Tanis Esther, it's very different than the slichos all year long. The slichos that we say before Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and the slichos on other fast days are very, very different because the slichos of Tanis Esther are celebratory. They're happy slichos, if you could say that, describing the miracles of Purim, and it's a request to Hashem that we get the same type of a favor that Hashem granted the Jews in Shushan should be granted to us as well. It's a more positive-oriented slichos than the ones before a regular fasting. An interesting question: do you recite Mizmor L'Soda on Tanis Esther? Mizmor L'Soda is in place of the Korban Toda, which is a generic korban for thanking Hashem for all the miracles that He does for us every day. Now, we don't say this on Erev Pesach, Erev Yom Kippur. There are certain days that we don't say Mizmor L'Soda, but since Tanis Esther was observed even during the time of the Second Temple, most authorities would tell you to skip Mizmor L'Soda on Tanis Esther. It's one of those, I don't know if you can call it a happy fast day, if you can call it that. But it's at a category all by itself. Because on the Tanis Esther will still be observed when the third base of Mikdash is built, apparently, according to this. And even though Tanis Esther was observed during Bayis Sheni, therefore, according to many poskim, you should skip it. This again, it depends on your local minhag. Some shuls would skip it. Some shuls might say it. You have to check your.
What about the other time?
On the other Tanesim, you do say Mizmor L'Soda. Because the other Tanesim are Tanesim of Peronios. They regard the destruction and terrible things, calamities that happen to the Jews. Tanis Esther is a celebratory fast, if I can call it that.
You don't say Mizmor L'Soda on Shabbos and Yontif? Or that's this is like a Yontif? Perhaps.
You could. It's one of those things you can argue both ways.
We normally do say it, right? I've never seen it.
Yeah, probably we do say it. From a hashkafic perspective, Tanis Esther is very interesting from a hashkafa perspective because most Tanesim, as I said, had to do with destruction, Peronios, etc. The Rabbi Yosef Karo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, says that we fast right before Purim to kind of guard ourselves against the Yetzer Hara before we spend the next day feasting and drinking and perhaps behaving in a way that might be inappropriate. So from our Shkafa perspective, we want to make sure that we act appropriately on Purim. So Tanis Esther reminds us about the serious nature of our joy, if I can put it that way. I'll say it in those words again. There's a serious aspect to our joy on Purim. And it's not a joy that is unlimited or unbounded. People go crazy. That is not. People get drunk on Purim and behave inappropriately. That is not what Purim is supposed to be like. You drink a little more than you usually drink. That's the halacha. If you don't drink at all, have one little drink, you're yotzei. But getting drunk and behaving and going, and sometimes people, celebrate too much and they miss mincha. There's all kinds of issues there. So Rabbi Yosef Kara says, hashkafically, the tanis right before Purim is to prepare you to behave appropriately. Shimshon for El Hirsch, on the same similar vein, says that the Purim story tells us that Jews can sometimes become very comfortable living in a foreign land. That is hospitable to them, and therefore we have to be careful to balance loyalty to government with loyalty to observing mitzvos. And when you don't do that, then Hashem threatens to destroy you, which was in the person of Haman. Others write that Tanis Esther is a day of Rachamim, and there we focus on Tefillah, and we invoke the schus of Mordechai and Esther, which you also find in the Slichos. And finally, the last hashkafic thought, which is a very pretty thought, quoting the Medrash, that when the Jewish people were fasting in preparation for Esther going to Achashverosh, Hashem switched from sitting on his throne of judgment to his throne of mercy. And the purpose of Tanis Esther, therefore, is to commemorate the original fast, but also to realize that we could also merit Hashem's rachamim through our tanis and through our tefillos. So it's a preparation for the celebration, but it's a musar preparation that we celebrate Purim, but we don't go overboard. And that's why some of the reasons for Tanis Esther. Anyhow, I thought it's fascinating because Tanis Esther is unlike all the other Tanisim, both in terms of the slichos, both in terms of the halachos. Makdimim, you fast earlier, and the slichos. Again, I urge you to read the slichos on Tanis Esther because they're very different from all the other slichos that we recite during the year. And again, it's a minhag. That's why we're a little bit more lenient. But be aware that there were some people who fasted for 3 days, which is what Esther did. Not a widespread minhag.
Rabbi?
Yes.
This isn't exactly at all like about Tanit Esther, but you did happen to mention that one approach about the Tanit Esther was to be aware, be more serious and all that in preparation for Purim Day, where we might go a little overboard and our behavior might not be 100% and everything. I have, as an adult, I have always, and as a teacher, I have always struggled with some of the, quote, permissible behavior on Purim Day. The culture, back then and everything, it wasn't like people walked around drinking 8 bottles of water. Wine was a big thing back then to consume. So maybe bodies were used to it. People were used to, that level of wine. In this day and age, where, finally Jewish community recognizes that there is such a thing as a Jewish alcoholic. I just cringe when I hear or see people on Purim drink or think they can drink so much. I mean, how can we give a heter? How are we a dugma to our children? Like, this is horrendous. As far
as so I couldn't agree more. A number of years ago, I was teaching at the Mesivta of Clifton, which is a very right-wing yeshiva. And I gave a shiur on the halacha of drinking on Purim. And the Rosh Yeshiva was there, and the principal was there. The Rosh Yeshiva actually was, the assistant Rosh Yeshiva was the great-grandson of the Chafetz Chaim. So a lot of big guns in the room. And I guess they were waiting for me to say something inappropriate, perhaps. But I gave a shiur quoting all the Mefarshim, saying that it is prohibited to get drunk, literally drunk, on Purim. You drink more than you normally drink, because the Nes of Purim always took place over drinking wine. Fine, but they didn't go crazy. At every meal that Esther invited Achashverosh and Haman to, they had a bottle of wine, they had a cup of wine, whatever it was. They didn't get drunk. I gave the shiur, and the boys listened. They weren't happy, but they listened. And the Rosh Yeshiva and the other rabbis that were there came over and said, 100% we agree. Fine. Comes the Purim Chagiga, and they're dancing, and there's music, and there's a band, and everybody's having a great time. But then every so often, guys are slipping off to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, there is a whole setup of top shelf liquor. Expensive booze. Top level, expensive whiskey, vodka, bourbon. We just talked about this. Who provided it? The parents. The parents donated all that whiskey and booze. So you're 100% correct. You are 100% correct. I don't know why it's become such a fashionable thing to do, but it is definitely halachically wrong and inappropriate, and it's not in the keeping of the spirit of Purim. There's Rabbi David Lifshitz once said, there's simcha shel Torah, and there's simcha shel hololus. And hololus is prohibited. You can't go crazy. You can't behave inappropriately. You can't get so drunk that you fall asleep and you miss davening. You can't get so drunk that you throw up all over the place. That's not covered at Torah. That's not the way to behave.
Let alone damn children. It's horrible for kids to see that.
It is horrible, and I wish the rabbis would take my shiur more seriously and do it, and really encourage them. What would have happened if, when the parents brought the whiskey to the school, the Rebbeim said, "I'm sorry, we don't do that." But that didn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, Hatzalah is very busy on Purim night, not only for picking up people who get sick because they drink too much, but there are car accidents that happen because of that. It's a terrible situation, and it's definitely not in keeping. Even in the Megillah itself, Yom Mishteh v'Simcha. So at a celebratory table, you have we go to Sheva Brachos, we go to other Simchas, and there's a bottle of wine on the table, and people have a glass of wine or a little sip. They don't get drunk. There's a bar at weddings. People don't get stupid drunk. They have a little drink. Whether they should drink and drive, separate issue. But you have to be sensible, and that's not what Purim is all about. And I share your frustration. That's all I can say.
Wally,
yes,
it also creates a major chilul Hashem.
Of course, it's a chilul Hashem.
People are parading around the streets, drunk.
Absolute chilul Hashem. It's not what the halacha dictates, and there's people. Unfortunately, you have that line that you should drink, so you don't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Oror Haman. That's an unfortunate line that we have, and people take it literally. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and I wish it would end. But like many other things, the rabbis have to become more vocal. Anything else?
Well,
Yes, Mendy.
Historically, I did Eretz Yisrael at this time, and all these people have the opportunity to go to Eretz Yisrael.
There were Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Travel was difficult.
They chose to stay there. Over the years, they could have gone, but they didn't want to go.
I don't know if they didn't want to go. It was just difficult to go. Travel was hard. There were pirates. It wasn't easy to travel. Even in much later years, the Vilna Gaon, for example, wanted very much to go to Eretz Yisrael. He got on a boat and he tried. He couldn't do it. It wasn't his Talmidim managed to go, and that's why most of them in Hagim in Eretz Yisrael followed Minhag HaGrua. Even the Sfardim. The Ramban made it. Yehuda Halevi made it, and people tried to go, but travel was very, very difficult. The Rambam managed to get there, but it was very difficult to travel in those days.
Maybe if they gone, the whole Purim story would have happened.
Yeah. Okay. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Be careful out there. The roads are tricky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go. Thank you, Wally.
Take care.
All right.
You watched it. You watched, right? What about it?
Rabbi Simon Baraya.
Hishem Lai Baruch Me'atov Yad Olam. Rosh Kal Mishlot V'Chayinu.